Ja, en dan wil je wat gaan bespreken. And then you want to talk about something, and then what are you going to talk about? And are you going to listen to the tips that your girlfriend gave you on how to set up the camera? Well, kind of, but I wouldn't be myself if I didn't do it in the diagonal version, so I'm not sitting straight in front of the door, but I guess it'll do. So I have no clue what I'm gonna talk about. Maybe in the future I would like to maybe take a few moments or minutes to think about a theme that I would want to talk about. Like, I even see it happening in my mind where you think of a theme and you think of a few sub subheads, and then you just talk along the lines of that. Yeah, it's so nice to start to step into your creative power and to start writing and to start making videos together with people on your own, allowing angels. So, yeah, allowing angels to guide you. And then, in this sense, I mean angels is in the form of people that bring a certain expressiveness or assertiveness with them so that they lovingly lure you into a certain activity that you maybe have been um, postponing or procrastinating on. And so by doing that and by experiencing that with these people and by having a breakthrough in that sense into certain activities, like for me, for instance, with speaking to a camera, um, well, yeah, that can help you to actually get to that point where it becomes easier to do so if you allow yourself to surrender to another person taking you with them in their process of recording, putting on some music. And yeah, at this moment right here, I feel and I see, I observe that there's tension in my system surrounding um, recording something. I feel that, like, it's the energy is kind of trapped in my upper three chakras, so the crown, the eye, and the throat. Uh, Maybe a little deeper to right above the heart. Yeah, I guess that's what I would love to do for videos like this, to kind of address and express vulnerably things like that, things that come up as I record, because you can talk and record and do all sorts of stuff without being vulnerable about the stuff that comes up in the back of your mind or the back of your heart. But what that does is you kind of exclude a large part of your energy and your cognitive attention, because there's this thing that seems kind of urgent to your system, but because you don't want to verbalize it and be vulnerable about it, that then creates a division where there's the me talking in the screen and the me that's engaged with the thing that it might be fearful or tense about. So I rather would like to see those two fuse, like be proactive and forthrightly as a man by just speaking, going out there and creating something, creating content, creating a session. But then while you're doing it, also allow your emotional side or your maybe your more weary side to get in there and to be vulnerable about that, and to then actually see that as a power, because now through that vulnerability you allow certain emotional aspects of yourself and cognitive aspects of yourself to enter the fray. And as long as you won't allow them to be part of this conversation, then yeah, you kind of divide yourself in half. So I would say there's power to being a disciplined man that is about action, unthwarted and unaffected by his emotions. But then at the same time, you are one with your emotions, so how can you ever be unaffected by them? And I would say there's power in that sense and truth in bringing your emotions forward and allowing them to be seen completely and to be vocalized completely. And then you kind of have like two senses of power coming together as one to create an even more powerful structure. And I suppose that's the true way we are as human beings. We both have this emotional side and more this machine like side that can just do. And to harmonize these two together is like upgrading a gun to like a laser beam gun, because now this gun is loaded with a novel source of almost alien like energy, but it's not alien at all. It's ours. It's magical and it's here. And if I come in, I can show that to you, that primal force, that flame, that energy, maybe that river, that the water, like the tears, the fire, the anger. If I can show that and bring that forward, I can use it to bolster expression, to forge connections more strongly, or to maybe forge them truthfully at all. Because if I show you my true emotion, then there's something that I was hiding in the deep that I'm now opening up and extending to you, and that is what you can connect to. Why can you connect to that? Because inherently you carry the same, and now you can recognize and resonate with that, and that allows for us to not actually create connection, but to realize it, to realize once again that we're one being that has just scattered itself into many different particles so that it could come to meet with itself once again, and to get to know itself more deeply. And we do this through emotion, because that's where we're like, oh, I'm going through this and this and this and this and this, and I have an ego, and I think I'm wrapped up all alone in this. And then once we start to show the emotions to each other, we can have these moments of awe and reassurance, because you're like, oh, I'm not alone in this. Like, all of the thinking and processing and worrying that you might do all are derived from an emotion that you're struggling with because it's unfamiliar to you, or you've stuffed it down, been afraid of it because it feels so intense, or you don't know what you're feeling exactly, and if that's all right or not, and that creates this sense of tension. And that's where the worries and the stories come from. But ultimately you have a certain sensation that you feel like you cannot deal with. That's what you start thinking and talking about, and then when you express it to your fellow man and they recognize it, it's like, oh, I wasn't alone in this inner battle, and like, other people understand. And so I feel a relief, because I now got to see that they also know. Yeah. So if you talk about it for a while, like, this is kind of like a weird phenomenon, right? Walking around in these monkey meat suits with all kinds of energies going on the inside, some that we cannot even literally see, but they're there. And then we are just walking around to kind of process those in a plethora of ways, and then to ponder about them internally and externally. And it's like this giant cascade of philosophers that are like, oh, am I this, or might I be that, or might it be so, and oh, it's this, but then I realize by seeing it, it has already become that. And what does it mean? And what is it for? And why do I create? Why do I feel? Why do I see? Why do I hear? Why do I think? And what does the thinking lead to? What does the acting lead to? What does the feeling lead to? And ultimately, it leads us to each other so that we can share to one another that we feel something, and then another can, by the mere fact that they can receive what you say, it must live within them. And then if they resonate with it, it's this feeling of, like I said, relief and reassurance of like, oh, I'm not alone after all. So it's one being that separated itself in a plethora of other beings so that they could all have the experience of being alone in a field of many, only to be a reflection of that one thing which is on its own by default, so that within that field of oneness, all those sub one parts, the individuals, can have this experience of relief by recognizing one another and what's going on inside. And we all might have many different versions and forms of expressions of certain feelings, but in the root, they're probably pretty much the same. I have some friends who teach children about emotions, and what comes up is that the experience of where anger is, for instance, or where sadness is very universal. Kids will describe what they feel, and they will all, if they are just to give their personal experience, they are all to point at a similar location, and they give similar descriptions as to what they're feeling. But of course, I don't. Of course, at this point, I don't have a scientific study on this, so I would be really interested to hear about that if any of you knows about a scientific study on the universality of sensing emotions. And yeah, now like I've gone on a nice rant, and still what's in the background kind of remains the same. I felt somewhere that if I would start to record this, I would mainly be grasped by a sensation of acceleration, and instead I find, well, I am enjoying this. I feel a sense of joy, especially now that I zoom in on it. And I also perceive this sense of sadness and held backness, like there's the energy in my throat, it's a bit contracted. Might have to do with the lack of sleep of the last few days, the caffeine intake, the struggle surrounding that, maybe also that masturbation and pornography use have been quite recent. What has been kind of beautiful process is that it has become more easy for me to have done stuff like that, like watching pornography and maybe having eaten some sugar, and then to go out there the next day and not to be too worried or too harsh on myself on having done those things, and I'm not going down into rabbit holes, analytical rabbit holes on what the effects are of those things on me in present time, and which would tend to get me down in this rabbit hole of worry and rumination, basically thinking about what the detrimental effect of something was, and then worrying about how it was now affecting me in real time, thinking that I sensed that, and then worrying again. But yeah, what I do notice is there's kind of like a story or self-soothing idea that if I drink coffee tends to increase the reuptake of dopamine. So I've created this narrative where it's like, okay, I can eat sugar and I can have, I maybe I have watched pornography and masturbated to it this day or the day before. But now that I'm on coffee, I have this stimulation of the increased cortisol plus the dopamine that I used can now be reuptaken. So the coffee would then kind of balance things like the effects of sugar and pornography on my brain. That's kind of how I view it. And it seems to be working that way, but this could also be an effect or partly an effect merely because I have this notion about it. If I were to, let's say, if I just have a day where I'm just on my ass and just chilling, and then I would watch pornography and masturbate to it, and I would just stay inside and watch a movie, there's not much anxiety going on. It's just, well, maybe I'm doing those things because subconsciously I am anxious about something. Usually that's the case, but I'm not actively anxious in the moment after something like that most of the time. But then let's say in an hour I have a session that I want to give to people. I'll do a presentation and I will guide people through stuff. If right now or in half an hour, just before I would go to the session, I would masturbate to pornography before that, then the cocktail of the actual biological and mental effects of pornography and my knowledge about how that could negatively impact me and the judgment surrounding that and all those factors times each other, and also times the fact that I'm about to do something that has to do with social performance, that could seriously fuck me up. I don't know how that would be now. I do feel like I have more mental models and also other tools that could kind of help me through that in a at least moderately helpful way. But I can also really imagine that it could really fuck me up and make me really anxious, that I would just do something like that in preparation of giving a session that I would could probably regard as highly valuable. So I would kind of have that activity of giving the session as a on a pedestal, and then to do something that could possibly thwart my performance skills before something like that I would deem so highly important, that could really create a lot of tension and anxiety. It's like, oh, now I feel this kind of down energy in my belly, and oh, that's all like sexual energy, that if it would have remained just where it was, it could have been a power source for this session, but I've now taken that away, and neurochemically my dopamine levels and serotonin levels are now probably lower, and watching porn and masturbating through it makes you prone to being more socially anxious. And now I've done that, and I have to stand in front of a group, and on a more self-image level, it could be like, oh, if I do that, I'm supposed to be a teacher, but I succumb to behaviors like that. Am I even uh, credible to be a teacher right now? Like that's the whole narrative, and it basically comes down to one thing or two. One is self-judgment, and you could lay it out on the basis of all these different modalities, but it comes down to the same thing. It's I do something with my system that could weaken it for the moment. So that's the judgment and the worry part that could get me down. And then there's the physical part that has supposedly been proven to actually have a negative effect. And then those combined can really get you in an anxious loop, but also somatically speaking, it can get you in this hold you in this dip, because rather than being a nonchalant guy that's like, oh, I can just watch porn and enjoy that just before I give a session and I'm all good, and I maybe take it a step further, I can even see the benefits of it because I choose to frame it that way and to pick those truths out of there and to use that to my advantage. If you can do it like that, you could even turn it into a helpful experience, or at least you would not be bothered by it and just go into the next moment not thinking about that you just wanked off. Like as a child, if you had maybe wanked off 2 or 3 times that day and later you would go maybe meet a friend, you wouldn't give it a thought. But the moment you start to learn about psychology and bioenergetics, all that stuff, that's the moment you also get an increased perception and then possibly worry around stuff that you do. Whereas before you might not even have given a shit and maybe it wouldn't have affected you at all. So yeah, that's how I noticed that my level of self-judgment and criticism tends to be very high. So if I do something that could influence me neurochemically, and I also notice, or I think that to notice that it's influencing me in any sort of way, I start to feel really heavy, and then it's really hard to distinguish. Is it, am I feeling this heavy because there was a negative sensation or negative interpretation of a sensation, and now I'm worrying about that, judging it so that it gets stronger and stronger, and the darkness and the dark pain becomes more stabilized? Or is the actual physical effect just that negative and distorting, that actually is what makes me feel bad, and thus obviously I will have negative feelings and cognition surrounding that, since I am feeling bad and the neurology is in a bad place. So negative perceptions and reactions will come to that, also as a mechanism to kind of help you navigate away from those things. I guess it's a bit of both, and maybe it's just explaining the same thing in another way. But yeah, I know this is a very strong theme in my life. There are these very obvious things that one might deem as deconstructive activities, like watching TV, or at least watching excessive TV, eating unhealthy snacks, watching pornography and masturbating to it, drinking coffee or excessive amounts of coffee, or drinking coffee when based on your experience you see that it's not benefiting you in the end. Drinking alcohol, um, like some of those are more negative than others, and it also depends on the degree and your relationship to it. But I notice for me, it's very easy for me to get in touch with those things, and then as soon as one of those activities kind of hits a negative spot or direction, then I really get very self-critical and judgmental, and it's not so much a very thoughtful thing, like when I watch TV and it starts to feel and I think that I could maybe have done something else, I might not be thinking for 10 minutes specifically, oh, I could do something else, and now I'm sitting here, but it's more like a feeling and a tension. So at the same time as I'm saying this, there might also be thoughts involved there, but that I'm not as aware of, or they come in different forms. For instance, what I've been having not lately, but like 1 or 2 weeks ago, and I've had this throughout my life often. Um, I can sit behind the TV watching, and at the same time, I see the outside and how appealing it is, and I hear the voices from people on the street, and that then connects to my practice of speaking to random strangers, and something in my chest, my ego, my physical contraction just tells me to like, it connects to this image that I'm literally seeing, and then it starts to flash this the same image or other image of being on the street and seeing the people and connecting to them. And it kind of signals to me, you have to go out there and do that, you have to go do out there and do that. You can't be, you can't stay here and stay here and keep on watching TV, because watching TV is wasting your fucking time, just pleasuring away, while you could be doing the work and create experiences for yourself and others and develop this skill more, this god-given talent that you have, and now you're doing nothing with it. You're watching TV, the thing where you're just throwing your time away. Oh, that's not good. And to do that, and it's funny because now I make it very specific in the kind of um, verbal information that comes with that, or thought information that comes with that. But my main experience in that is really the images and the physical contraction that I feel. But of course, the mere fact that I can relate the exact verbalizations to this um, makes it obvious that that's the thought that is connected to that whole experience and that whole attitude. And it's basically those images and that contraction is those words I just said translated. Um, but in the image and the physical contraction, that's the literal thing that I experienced, right? And it's very close to what's actually happening here. It's okay, so it's supposed to be something that I want to do, that's my joy and inspiration, but now it comes from this place of forcing and having to perform that is so intense that it contracts me out of action. Something not right there. And well, that obviously has to do with shadow and ego, where the spirit wants to grow and flow through you, but the ego just wants you to be safe, so it's afraid of that boon and that power and that potentiality. So as soon as the inspiration rises and becomes apparent, also the equivalent lock of the ego becomes present as well, as two opposing forces. In the presence of spirit, the ego will flare up, and that is then actually your invitation and your signal, oh, that might be actually where I need to go. But then at the same time, yeah, you could argue that this whole contraction and my ego saying you have to do this is actually a trick, so to work against me doing it, because that's exactly what happens. And on another level, it could also be that the ego also doesn't just want to be safe by keeping you down, it also wants you to be safe by performing and by performing and by becoming stronger and conquering, and by at least performing up to a standard that you have already done in the past, so you can maintain a certain self-image that feels like it can survive and like it has a certain status amongst certain groups of people that also provide safety. But then in a way, this ego can form and stack up and contract and imbalance itself and you in such a way that it actually starts to work against functioning, because it functions out of fear. It wants to maintain a status or climb up on the status ladder because it's afraid to to die or fall behind in other words, which also means death essentially, or at least less resources. But that is also a ticket closer to death in the eyes of the ego. So in other words, if the ego functions out of fear, then there will come a point where it's done so for so long that the contraction of fear starts to immobilize you altogether. Unless your ego is has healthily matured and continues to do so by giving itself appreciation, by achieving certain goals, by getting input from certain positive factors so that it grows in a balanced way where part of the motivation comes from a fear to fail and to die essentially, and part of the motivation comes from more relaxing and positive vibes like appreciation and support of your community. And if you have that, or you start to implement that, then you, the ego, this vessel that has identified with certain characteristics, this body and aspects of the soul, ego, can start to move again, because now, as you start to implement appreciation and support, there's enough relaxation and sense of security to counterbalance the contraction. So now there's a healthy balance of tension and a fear to die, and a sense of security and hopefulness. And that combination will allow you to move in a balanced way. But if your ego is just based on fear, like, I feel like I'm going to die, I feel like I'm low status, I feel like my status needs to be higher, I feel like I'm afraid that I'll lose my status and functioning. If you're just based on that, then at some point that will become contractive, not facilitative. There was also there's this, I believe she's a psychologist or a motivational speaker at least. She's called Mel Gibson, blonde lady. She has very cool things to say, one of which was that studies showed that tough love and being hard on yourself is not nearly as effective and even counterproductive, especially when you compare it to cheering for oneself, being appreciative of oneself, being in one's own corner and being supportive of oneself. So that's where you see this same principle. If it's just being hard on yourself, which essentially comes from fear of not being good enough, then this will in the end be a detriment to health and to functioning, whereas cheering oneself on, coming at yourself with those positive emotions, which are literally translated to neurology, the stimulative currents, then this will help you to move and to relax enough to move, because it's like, oh, I appreciate the fact that I already did this, and this. That means I now have opened myself up to the self-image of a capable person. That means I feel so secure about being me, because I sense that I'm a capable individual that can handle situations as they come at him. Then that means I am so relaxed that I'm ready and able to function. And I'm not only relaxed enough through this sense of security, I'm also positively stimulated to move through this current of appreciation that says like, hey, I'm Timon and I can do this and this and this. That means it's gonna be fucking fun to try and do this. And that boils down also to my thesis. I wrote my thesis for my master's on hormesis, and it's basically this fundamental principle in most organisms, where a low or high amount of stress, this is not hormesis, a low or high amount of stress relative to the individual organism will actually cause a detriment to certain functions of that organism. Whereas a moderate stress level relative to that organism will actually bolster those same functions. And yeah, you see this pervading what we just talked about, meaning that if you have this certain level of security and stimulation, and then you face a stressful event, you feel like you can handle it. It elicits stress, but only to an extent that it facilitates you, but still allows you clarity of mind and functioning. But let's say you're just being critical on yourself, just beating yourself up and being like, I need to work harder, I need to work better, I need to be stronger, I need to be the strongest, because, again, the root is, I'm insecure, I don't feel like I'm good enough, I don't feel like I can do this. So I just shout over that by saying, I have to work harder, I have to do better, which is only a front that tries to prove to that deep insecurity, that root, that it can do it, but actually that voice in the front that's like shouting and beating up already is in disbelief of his own capability, so it's only enforcing that. And to make the point, this is of course highly stressful inner impulse that you're giving yourself, like, oh, work harder, be stronger. It's like, there's, if you were two persons, it would be like as if one was cracking the other with a whip, which is a very stressful situation. And so if you connect this to the hormesis curve that I just explained to you, then this inner impulse alone, since it's the very fundament of how you feel about yourself, would already be so insecure and highly stressful that it would immediately put you in a position where dysfunction starts to rise. And then on top of that, you must also harness the stressor, or harness is then not you must also carry the stressor that is still to come your way to deal with something. But if you're already overly critical, you've already put yourself in a dysfunctional state, and the stressor that you then have to deal with will make you even more disrupted, which then proves to that self-critic that already felt that he couldn't do jack shit, that he's right, further decreasing your self-worth and further enforcing this self-critical attitude that comes from a root of disbelief in oneself. So yeah, then if you do the opposite, you cheer for yourself, you're kind to yourself, you create a secure and relaxed environment where you can be secure in your own ability and also positively stimulated in your own ability, and even more so when a challenging situation arises, then you can actually start to train yourself to become more and more optimal in stressful situations, because it becomes a momentum of, oh, what's the new challenge? Oh, let me see how I can test my ability and improve myself, and I actually know that I'm capable and I can deal with any situation. So I only want to I already know that, and I will let this situation validate that once more. And because you have that attitude, that will be granted, and therefore this self-image will be further enforced, and you will be stacking up evidence in favor of it. And this is actually the fundamental truth of what you are, because you are a human being, you are intelligence on feet, water, air, fire, earth, and ether combined, and it's just you're a walking computing machine, one with its agents of reality formation. It's actually pretty insane. We see it as something normal, but I walk around here wielding the elements that can further wield the reality that it's maneuvering in. It's crazy actually, and it's so funny that it's such a casual thing. But yeah, by default, you are a problem solving genius. So to pick up this notion that you are very capable of handling any situation that you're in is actually acknowledging and revealing the truth of what you are. It's not something new that you build and create. It's what you are and what you realize and what you bring out. Even you being a human being in development that then later in life can look back at his life resume to say, oh, I did this, I did that, I did that, I solved this, I went through that, somehow this came together and I moved up there and created that, and this all worked out. All of that history is evidence of the fact of what reality is: a self solving machina. And if you want to carry over the explanation on an individual level, you, as an extension of that river of reality, that being,